Welcome to the Infinite Surface podcast, Fat Stacks. Today we're looking at Anthony Ryder's The Artist's Complete Guide to Figure Drawing. This is an interesting book, and I think that this review will be a little bit shorter than most of the ones that I do, mainly because I really only recommend this book for one purpose, maybe two. It's a good book. It's filled with great drawings. Anthony Ryder is a great drawer. You can see that right away. It's great composition, great shadow layouts, great rendering. And that's really the thing that this book can teach you about, is rendering techniques. So I think anything else, especially in terms of conceptual form, laying in, sketching, something like that, I think that those are better gone over in other books. But this is a great book for really developing form into its full expression. If you have a different style than Anthony Ryder, I think that that's okay. If you don't want your drawings to come out as, he puts it here, classical, traditional, right? So if you don't want them to be as classical and traditional, that's okay. But I think that understanding the shapes of the features and the forms and the lighting effects, I think all of that is really well done here. So there's nothing lost to understand how to draw something like this if your intention is to draw something another way. Any kind of style is just a reduction from this kind of understanding, or an expansion on it. So this envelope concept, right? This is really similar to what we saw in the last review of How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, where we talked about the compositional aspect of drawing. And this went over that really well, where we see layouts and designs that explain to us where the figures sit within the composition. So that's really great. And this part is kind of difficult to comprehend unless you are working directly in front of a model or unless you have direct reference. So if you're inventing, this isn't very useful. And that's where a book like Figure Drawing, Design, and Invention, because it's focusing on construction and invention, it doesn't have anything like this, right? And this is really useful for understanding from observation the overall proportion of a composition. So you see shapes like this laid out in compositions and in drawings that are more from more from invention as well, but really it's most useful from observation. So we see how he works into these kind of envelopes, how he starts to subdivide. All of this is really, really useful to be able to do. So even if you are talking about invention, it might be hard for you to start to imagine how you would even understand this shape if you're working from invention. It's such an abstract concept, and then how you would start to divide that up or work towards an invention sketch or a construction sketch from a shape like that. But the more experience you have working from life, the more experience you can get with making shapes that are dynamic and make sense in your invented drawings. That's not always the case for artists. Sometimes artists get kind of stuck in what observation can offer and sometimes just follow this format of replicating what they see so closely that there's not much invention or exaggeration or stylization at all. And that can be fine as well. But if you're after something a little bit more stylized, then these parts of this book might not make a lot of sense to you. But he does go over, these are nice pages on design and rhythms and things like that, and relationships from side to side. All of that is really good. But where it really gets good is where he starts to talk about laying in form. And you see how he renders form so beautifully all throughout this book. Really, really round shapes. And here we get into basic designs about how simplified forms relate to complicated forms, and how we can start to see these as simplified forms with just little interruptions or little topographical changes. This is really useful. I think that later he goes really in depth, we'll see in a few pages, about how to work with a pencil or whatever marking tool you're making, And here you see he's a lot more directional in his mark makings than it is here. So I'm not sure if this is meant to be like a first pass and he's going to refine it into something like this, or if this is just an entirely different style or sketch of drawing. But you can see some of that mark making, some of this beautiful texturing in these other drawings as well. So here it gets a little simpler, and he's laying out the 5 value system, or maybe the 7 value system as he has here. Just an expansion on the 5 value system, and useful to start to think in that way as well. So let's skip forward a little bit here and try to catch up with some of his line and mark making techniques. And as I'm flipping through, you can just see great examples of his beautiful drawing technique, but very laborious, very tedious, and it's a building process. So this is really useful about keying the drawing, about finding the shadow lines. We see this rarely discussed in books past identifying the core shadow. Here he's really talking about separating the drawing into sides, and I think that that's really valuable. And we see all sorts of beautiful drawings here still, and we're getting towards the end of the book, pulling it all together. And here we see a process of him laying out from initial sketch to final, and we're almost at the end of the book. So again, just to recap, because this is kind of a short video, I think the real value here, if we come back and we find some of his instruction about mark making in pencil, these pages are really valuable, his hatching and cross hatching. And we'll go over this in a review of Arthur Guptill's book much more comprehensively, because it really gets into it. But here he talks about it in a very subtle way, and you can see how clear his forms are. So if you're interested in developing shapes like that and having a kind of convincingness to the shapes that you're making in terms of how light affects them, this is a great book to get into to help you figure that out. So that's it for this review of Anthony Ryder's The Artist's Complete Guide to Figure Drawing. Thanks for watching the Infinite Surface podcast Fat Stacks on The Artist's Complete Guide to Figure Drawing by Anthony Ryder. I really hope you liked the book, and I hope you liked the video. And if you like the video, then maybe like it and follow and subscribe so that you can get updates on all of the upcoming content that we have on the Infinite Surface podcast.